Good morning. Awesome to be here. So I'm Drake. Man, we're gonna dive in today. Where is it appropriate to stand? Can I be everywhere, anywhere? Is that fine? Awesome. Okay, what I need you to do is pull out your phone with me for a moment. And really unique day that we would take the Lord's Supper and have a moment of perspective challenge. And so that's what I want to talk about today. So do me a favor, pull out your phone if you have one, hopefully. And then what I need you to do is open up your camera. Yep, it's going to be good. All your friends on social media are about to get a great surprise. So here's what I need you to do. Just in a conversation about perspective, I need you to take your camera and I need you to point it at your neighbor's face. And then I need you to take your two fingers, I need you to zoom in just a little bit or a lot of bit on their face, okay? And then I need you to take a good picture, whatever angle you have, up their nose, whatever it is. So capture a picture for me, and as soon as you have that, then I need you to go to your photos, and I need you to pull up that picture. Now, what I want to talk about today is perspective, and I don't know about you, but man, it's so easy to get zoomed in on life. So just every day, life happens, and so we can get zoomed in and really miss the big picture of what God's trying to do around us. And so what I want you to do right now is pull up that picture that you just took. It's probably not very flattering, and I need you to post it to Twitter, Facebook, all of those things. I'm just kidding, don't do that. But here's what I want you to do, and this will come up at the end of the message today, is I need you to make that picture your home screen. All right, just go ahead and set it as your default. It's going to serve as a reminder this week as we wrap up, just some action steps, some things that'll serve as a reminder over the week. So make that your home screen. Hopefully it's going to be a not so flattering reminder every time you pull it up throughout our time together. So again, today what I want to do is invite you to check your perspective with me. And we're going to be in Matthew 28. And so if you want to go there with me, Matthew 28 verses 19 and 20. And so in this conversation of perspective, I don't know about you, but man, it's so easy for me to get distracted and to lose that big picture. And so like Danielle and I, we can go to a restaurant. How many of you guys have ever been to BJ's before? BJ's brewery restaurant, they got pizza and all kinds of good stuff. Well, what's unique about BJ's is they have TVs everywhere, and they're very up high. And I have a very, very small attention span. And so anytime Danielle and I go to BJ's, she has to intentionally sit me away from the TVs so that I can actually pay attention to my date. Because unintentionally, I just lose perspective, and I'll start, I don't even like sports. I don't really watch sports or whatever's on, and I'm just gone, just watching TV. My perspective gets so zoomed in that I miss the big picture. And so I want to look at Matthew 28 this morning and just watch Jesus blow up the perspective of his followers. And so in Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20, I believe it'll be on the screen here. Jesus has given his life on the cross, risen again, and now he's standing before his disciples. And here's what he says. He comes and he says to them, those that are following him, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." Now, what I love about this passage is this is Jesus, his commission to those that are following him. So I don't know about you today. Maybe you're a follower of Jesus, maybe you're not. And hopefully today you can kind of check your perspective and just evaluate. If I'm not a follower of Jesus, do I want to be? Why would I want to be? If I am a follower of Jesus, how's my perspective? Am I zoomed in? Am I missing things that God might have for me? Or am I getting that big picture? What does God see and what does Jesus see that I don't see? And so what I love about this passage is that Jesus sees in these guys what no one else can see. This is so cool because Jesus is talking to a bunch of nobodies. And that's great news for me. It's why I love this passage, because I'm a nobody. And I'm like, great. If Jesus can use these guys, then he can probably use me. And if he can use me, then he can definitely use you. And so really cool. These guys are fishermen. They're tax collectors. They're uneducated. They're socially awkward. One of the guys has a serious foot and mouth syndrome. And so you have all these difficulties, these nobodies. And Jesus looks at them and says, hey, you're going to change the world. And so when I invite you to check your perspective today, what I'm really asking you to do is, what does Jesus see in you and around you that maybe you and I are missing? What is it that maybe he sees as far as potential and capacity in you that you and I might be missing? See, there's a couple things that really blow up their perspective here. The first thing Jesus tells these guys to do is to go to all the nations. And I don't know about you, but traveling is getting a little easier these days, right? But you can hop on a plane and pretty much be anywhere in the world in a day or so, depending on where you're going. But for these guys, right, they probably haven't ever gone outside of the city that they grew up in. And so then when Jesus looks at these nobodies who have no accolades to speak of, and he says, hey, you're going to go to all nations, right? That's problem number one. I've never been outside of my hometown. This is going to be a problem. So he sees something in them that they don't see. Number two that you see, he says, go to all the nations, but then also, as you make disciples, as you tell people about me, what I've done on the cross in their place for their sins so that they can be set free and live free, as you tell them that and help them to become followers of me, then I want you to baptize them like we did this morning. And maybe at this point they're like, okay, like I can do that. I mean I've dunked people in the pool before, right? So, right, like we can probably do that together. That's not as intimidating, although maybe a little strange. And then the last thing he says, go make disciples, baptize them. And then he says this really challenging part. Teach them how to follow me. Teach them the things that I've taught you. And if you're like me and your perspective is constantly challenged and you're like, man, I can't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. How am I going to remember what to teach these guys? And so Jesus takes some nobodies and he blows up their perspective and says, hey, I'm going to use you to change the world. And so I just want to invite you to check your perspective this morning. Is there anything in your life that you've zoomed in on? Maybe even as we talk about the Great Commission, and you think about the Great Commission being out there or over there or someone specific's job. But what about for you? The unique thing is Jesus is not speaking to any professional Christians. He's just talking to his followers. And if you're a follower of Jesus this morning, that means he's talking to you and I. And if you're not a follower of Jesus this morning, I'd love you to evaluate his heart behind what he's talking about. And so let me share just our story briefly of how God called us to Colorado, and then I'll lead into our next passage. So God really blew up our perspective about 3 years ago. I was at a meeting, a pastor's meeting in Fort Worth, Texas, and this guy named Michael Haley, who's a church replanter in Colorado Springs, was speaking about what God was doing in Colorado. And we're sitting in a little room with a bunch of pastors, and in that moment, God speaks to me and says, hey, I want you to go to Colorado. And immediately my perspective is all kinds of messed up. What? A couple problems, God. I don't know anybody in Colorado, and I've never been to Colorado. All I know is there's mountains and weed. That's all I've got going for me right now. And so a little bit of a challenge. And so then I make a connection with Michael that day, and just kind of risking it. I don't even know him. And so I'm like, hey, this is awkward. I think God's calling me to Colorado. I don't know you, and I've never been. Can you help me out? And what starts as a weird conversation opens up incredible doors. And so then about a year later, I get to meet Daryl and a couple of other guys that are in the Colorado network, and they begin to open up doors and opportunities. And God begins to open up this door to come to Colorado and start a church. And what's incredible is through meeting Daryl, and then we got to meet Nick Olson, and we got to meet Gary Shackleton, some guys that were actually in Daryl's youth group growing up. And then God connects me with a guy in Boston named Sean Sears, who you guys have supported as well. And he connects me with a guy in Missouri. I'm having a blank. What's his name? Help me out. What's his name? Chris Highfield, that you guys also support. I'm just name dropping. You might not even know who I'm talking about. Mike texted me this morning, and he said that he was married in this church. So it's really cool. God starts to do all of these things, and he's connecting the pieces. And what's amazing is that God opens a door for us to plant a church in Boulder, Colorado. And so in November of 2016, we moved to Boulder. We actually live in North Boulder now. And Nick and Tara Olson had planted a church in Erie, Colorado, about 15 miles from us. And so we had the opportunity to do a residency with them and to learn from them as we live in our community. And God is just doing incredible things already. So it's a little bit of our story, and God has just been stretching our perspective. And I want to show you a verse in addition to Matthew 28 that really complements what Jesus is telling us to do. And so as you check your perspective, the next thing I want to do is to challenge your perspective. And just as we evaluate what God has for you and I, the historical approach for church planting, I have a little diagram on the screen here for you. Most people think this way, that hey, we're going to move to a city, we're going to plant a church, we're going to make disciples, and then as a result, we're going to engage our community. The problem with that is that it's totally backwards. Like if we move to Colorado, get a building, open up the doors and say, okay, come on in. It's just going to be my wife and I and our son hanging out in an empty room because no one's coming to church because you open the doors, right? And so this is just really backwards from the biblical model we see and what Jesus tells us to do. So here's our strategy. If you flip that upside down, it's first to engage your community. And as a result of engaging your community and your neighbors, you start to make disciples. And as a result of making disciples, you're able to plant a church. And so let me show you in Luke chapter 10, this incredible challenge from Jesus that I hope it'll stretch our perspective a little bit. And so in Luke chapter 10, verse 2, Jesus is talking to his disciples. This precedes the Great Commission that we just read, but it's talking about the same mission. Jesus had one really big mission, and that's to save and set free. And so he says to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And so, man, this has stretched me so much. As you read this verse, Jesus says, hey, the harvest is plentiful. People always talk about how hard Boulder is, and it's an incredible city, 100,000 people, and 91% of the population separated from any kind of evangelical influence. There's a huge need for church planting. 39 out of the last 40 churches have failed in Boulder. There's a huge need. But not any more than for you and I here in our city or back in Fort Worth. There's a need everywhere. And check out what Jesus says. He doesn't seem to be so concerned about whether or not people are going to start following him, whether they're going to be saved and set free. He says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. He says, so pray that God would send out laborers into that harvest. You would think that Jesus would say, hey, pray for people to get saved. Pray for people to meet Jesus. You would think that would be what he instructs us to do, but he says, no, actually, I think they're going to do it. I'm not really worried about people getting saved. I'm really worried about whether anyone's going to go or not. And here's what happens is we get stuck in this professional Christian mentality that it takes someone special to go and plant a church. It takes someone special to make an impact in their city. And we can start back at Matthew 28 that Jesus uses nobodies, and that's great news because that means all of us are included in that. Congratulations. And so here's what's incredible is that he uses this term laborer. And I started reflecting on this. What is significant about a laborer? Nothing, right? Like, nothing at all is significant about a laborer. There's not a high education rate. It's just someone who's willing to get out there, work hard, and get their hands dirty. And you know what? When it comes to loving people, it's hard work. Get our hands dirty, but it's worth it. And so instead of talking about how hard it is to see people come to know Jesus, what if we just switched this and actually started engaging our neighbors? And so I thought about this. What if we switched this word laborer with the word neighborer? I know it's not grammatically correct, but work with me. The word neighborer. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And so as you challenge your perspective, I just want to wrestle just for a moment. This word send out, he says, man, pray that God would send out. It means to grab a hold of violently. And my prayer for you and I this morning is that God would grab a hold of our hearts violently and help us to zoom out our perspective and to see the people that he has placed around us. That our goal is not to get people to church. Our goal is to get people to Jesus. And that means that we got to do whatever it takes to get people to Jesus. And that means that we might, when we get home from work, instead of closing our garage and going inside, hanging out in the front yard on purpose so we can intentionally engage our neighbors. It might mean going to lunch with people at work on purpose. It might be hanging out with people at school and doing what they're doing rather than inviting them to what we're doing. Have you ever been the person that's that one new person invited to maybe a party or something and you felt that awkwardness? You ever been there? So often we spend our time and we spin our wheels inviting people to our stuff, thinking that spiritual activity is going to lead to spiritual transformation. It doesn't necessarily equate to that. What if we quit making our neighbors feel awkward by inviting them to our stuff and we started going to their stuff? Let me close with this. Jesus gives us one really big challenge at the end in Matthew chapter 22. And the last thing I want to do is I want to invite us to change our perspective. And Jesus gives us this verse in Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39. And he invites us into a concept that will revolutionize our perspective and the world. And so let me give you this as we close. Jesus is talking to his disciples again. And there's some religious guys that have come up and have really trying to trick Jesus and saying, hey, what's the most important thing we need to focus on? Hoping that he's going to say one thing and not the other, and they can catch him and, we got you because you said this is more important. And so then Jesus blows up their perspective again, and this is complementing the Great Commission that we read in Matthew 28. Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and then in Deuteronomy, all your strength. So he's quoting a passage from Deuteronomy. In verse 38, he says, this is the great and first commandment. So they say, what's the most important thing we can spend our time on? He says, man, you love God with all that you have. And he says that the second is like it. It's just as important. To love your neighbor as yourself. This is really important that Jesus gives these instructions before the Great Commission in Matthew 28. So this passage right here precedes the Great Commission, meaning there's a priority here. It's not about activity and what we can do for God. He says it starts with your relationship with God. Intimacy is our first calling, not ministry. Jesus died on the cross to restore two primary relationships, our relationship with God and our relationship with our neighbor. Only Jesus can save and set free. The reason that we're followers of Jesus is not to earn his favor, but because through Jesus we have his favor. And we have the opportunity to share that favor and that good news with the world, with our neighbors. The harvest is plentiful in Lakewood, but the laborers are few, Jesus says. And so what if we zoom out our perspective and allow God to begin to use us to be our literal neighbors on our street, in our circles of influence, in the activities and sports that our kids are in, at school, in our workplace, wherever it is that God has us. What if we started to neighbor intentionally and engage those around us with the love of God? The second thing he says is to love your neighbor as yourself, which I find interesting. We don't have a problem normally loving ourselves well, but when we have a proper relationship with God, we have a proper view of ourselves. And it's out of the overflow of that relationship with Jesus that allows us to love our neighbor well and allows us to keep our perspective zoomed. And so I don't have time to give you this last illustration, and so I'm just going to give you the big idea from this morning. That's this, that when we live love, lives change. And so Jesus gives us this one big overarching theme. He says, love God and love people. And the language that we use both back in our student ministry and as well in Boulder is this calling to live love. And so this big idea is simply this, that when you and I live love, lives change. So let me give you a few things to wrestle with as we close out. Just a couple application steps for you and I. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I find myself trying to do things in my own effort, and I get frustrated, and right, there's ugly parts of me that come out, and so I constantly see my need to run to Jesus. And so I don't know about you, but Jesus intentionally says, hey, your relationship with God is priority. And so maybe today you're not a follower of Jesus, and you just need to know, man, he loves you. He gave his life for you on the cross. He rose again, proving he was who he said he was. And by trusting in him, he will save you, set you free, restore that relationship with God, and empower you to love your neighbor. It's an incredible, incredible gift that we don't deserve, that we simply receive by faith, by trusting that he is who he said he was, and he did what he said he did. So maybe you are a follower of Jesus today, and that intimacy is lacking. And maybe you're trying to do a bunch of stuff for God to earn his favor rather than just resting in the fact that you have it through Jesus. Maybe you need to run to Jesus this week. And as you look at your phone and you look at that really awkward picture that I had you set, maybe it's a reminder for you this week that you need to run to Jesus first, because it's out of the overflow that you and I love our neighbors well. Maybe Jesus said that as we love our neighbors, it also includes engaging each other. And we need believers in our lives to help us grow. And so maybe there's this need for you to let people in, to have some other believers who love Jesus and love you and are going to be honest enough with you to help you grow. Or maybe that's a part of this wrestling this week, that means you spend time with Jesus and you love your neighbors, but you don't let people into your personal life. And maybe you need to have some of those relationships this week, that you allow people to speak into your life. But the last thing, and this is where I know personally for me, I need work, and then also maybe for you as well, that we all need the capacity to live love, that we need to start engaging our neighbors. And so maybe this week, it means that you're going to have your neighbors over for dinner. Maybe it means that you're going to stay out front a little longer, watching your neighbors come home, waving across the street. It might be a little awkward. That's okay. Maybe it means you're going to mow your neighbor's yard just to give you an excuse to high-five them and say, that you value them. Maybe it means that you're going to go out to eat with them after work and join everybody that's going to the bar. That's what Jesus did. Maybe it means that you're going to make a list and begin to pray for them by name, all of your neighbors and all the context that you have and the people that God has placed in your life, just so you can be aware and keep that perspective open. Maybe it needs to just get to know their names. Maybe you have neighbors all around you and you don't even know their names. So maybe just making intentional efforts this week to get to know their names. I don't know what it is for you. I don't know how it is that you can engage your neighbors this week, but I just want to invite you, as you look at your phone this week, as you evaluate your relationships, man, that first priority of loving God is crucial. But then out of that overflow, making an intentional effort to neighbor well, because the harvest is plentiful, but the neighbors are few. But the good news is Jesus can use nobodies like me and you to change the world.